I knew these two people once. They were really in love with each other. She was young, about 17 or 18. He was quite a bit older. He looked raggedy and wild, but she was beautiful. And she loved him because no matter what, they made everything into an adventure. Even going to the grocery store became an adventure. And he lived to make her laugh. They were always together, and they were really happy. They were always together. He couldn't stand being away from her, and so he'd quit jobs just to be with her. And when the money ran out, he'd get a new job, get the money, and then quit just so he could be with her. But pretty soon she began to worry. Money, I guess, not knowing when the next check was coming in. And so he became torn because he knew he had to provide for her, but he couldn't stand being away from her. And then he got crazy because he started thinking that she was seeing men on the sly. And so when he got her home, he'd accuse her. And he'd yell and he'd throw things in their trailer, yet they lived in a trailer home. And it got really bad. He started to drink, and he'd stay up late to test her to see if she'd get jealous, but she wouldn't get jealous. She'd just worry. But that would get him even madder, because if she didn't get jealous, then she didn't really care about him, he thought. But then one night she told him that she's pregnant. 3 or 4 months pregnant, and everything changed. He quit drinking, he got a steady job, and they were okay. And he didn't notice it at first, but she began to become irritated at everything. Even her own son was an injustice to her, and he tried really hard to make her happy the way that he did when they first met, but he realized that he couldn't, and so he began to drink again. And this time it was worse. This time it got mean, because he'd come home late, and she wasn't worried or jealous. She'd just be enraged. She'd yell at him and tell him, "You're keeping me captive by having had me have that baby." And then she told him about their dreams, that every night she'd dream about escape from him, running naked through a field, and just as she's about to, he'd be there. And he'd stop her, and he'd take her back, and he knew. When she told him this, that he believed her. He knew it was true. And he knew that he couldn't let her, because she'd never come back. So he tied a cowbell to her ankle so he could hear her every move. But pretty soon she began to figure out a way to muffle it by stuffing a sock into it. And then one night, the sock fell out and he heard her, and she was making her way down the highway, and he grabbed her and he dragged her back into the trailer, and he tied her with a belt to the stove. And then he just went back to bed, and he laid there listening to her screams. And then his son began to scream, and he realized that he didn't feel anything for him. And he went to sleep. And when he woke up, his sheets were on fire. He got out of bed and he ran to the two people he loved the most in this world, but they weren't there. and his arms caught on fire, so he jumped out and rolled around on the wet ground, and he ran. And he didn't look back. He just kept running. And he ran until the sun came up, and when the sun went back down, he just kept on running for 5 days. Until there was no more sign of man.